Welcome everyone to the Dreambuildrs podcast. I am super excited for this upcoming episode. It's an episode where I've been looking forward to for a while because it's an episode that we're going to talk about, getting to know yourself really better and really about what kind of unconscious patterns keep you stuck from living your dream life. And I think my next guest really holds the key to open up a new path of your transformation. So I'm very delighted to introduce to you Lisa Tahir. Now, Lisa is a licensed therapist. She's the host of the popular podcast All Things Therapy, and she's also the author of The Chiron Effect, Healing Our Core Wounds Through Astrology, Empathy, and Self-Forgiveness. And she was also endorsed by His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama. So, Lisa, I'm super happy to have you on the Dream Wellness podcast.
Jochem, I am so delighted to be here with you and your audience and learning from you a bit about Portugal and just the really beautiful things you and your family have access to recharge and reboot yourself, which is so important. And I know we're going to be talking more about that in our time today.
Yeah, we were just talking about, just before we started about about Portugal, and that I was rebooting myself last week actually in one of the Portuguese islands, Madeira. So beautiful, right? The nature there, and it was good weather. And I'm coming back, and I just told you it's raining here in the Portugal mainland, and it's cold. And you went out to ski last weekend, so we both rebooted ourselves for this conversation. So I'm really looking forward to talk about personal transformations, but also, of course, about your book and how it helps people really to, embrace their authentic self. And so, a question I would love to ask, and it's kind of a deep question to start with, first of all,
Sure.
but then I think we get started from the right path. Is like, when you look back at your life, what has been for you the kind of most important factor for you to start living your dreams?
It ties into what you were just saying, in fact, Yosham, and the connection I've realized between personal transformation and rebooting and recharging ourselves and doing things like you did going to the island in Portugal and like I did going skiing. I, for so many years, lived under the belief system that personal transformation, therapy, change, and healing had to be this really rough and abrasive kind of process that's painful, that's hard. And it's just in these recent years that I've come to realize certainly it could be that for you, yet it doesn't have to be that for you because we can transform and grow and change through a path of more ease through in being inspired, feeling inspired, receiving those inspired downloads and messages through doing things like going to the beach, going skiing, spending time in nature. That I've had so many transformative experiences when I'm in this place of neutrality, on one end of the spectrum, and then peace and joy on the other end of that spectrum. And these insights and awarenesses start to bubble up from within me that cause me to understand some of the experiences or situations that have been challenging. And so it's been this really new revelation in my life about and wanting to share that with others through the principles in my book and on my podcast about personal transformation, embracing it as something more joyful. And I wonder what you think about that, even.
Well, I totally recognize that, and if I'm looking back at my life, I worked for corporate for a long time, so I have been working for 8, 9 years in corporate job, where I didn't really feel like I had I was very satisfied in my career, but I wasn't getting really that true meaning and full enrichment out of my life. And so when you're talking about, rebooting yourself, like refreshing, and what I envisioned myself to be doing was like operating at like a super high energy level every day in my work. And that is what I hear you saying right now. So when I took a sabbatical from my work environment and started doing things that I really, really liked,
Yeah.
apart from the things that I was already doing, like meditation, yoga, that already gave me a lot of energy, and of course, being in nature, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
But like really living out what truly mattered to me, like for me, that was, for example, starting to volunteer as a trainer and coach in Sri Lanka, something that I really loved and I was
Wow.
already doing back home in the Netherlands, where I have been training athletes along my life. And so I think that is like when I came back from volunteering, that kind of rebooted my energy, right? That sort
Yeah.
of like I was like, wow, I got so much energy from the things that I was doing, and I traveled also to California. That was something I also loved to do,
Yes.
also to meet some friends. But that was a kind of a dream that I had. And okay, when you start living that out, you start feeling the energy that you truly are and that you truly possess, and where you also want to go to. And so that kind of gives you steps forward to really start living kind of your I wouldn't say dream life, but really start living a life that is more meaningful and enriching for yourself. So it's really talking about energy. So that's how I kind of feel about it. But
Yeah, and I
uh,
hear you saying that it kind of built upon itself, like step by step, that
yeah.
it was like just walking down the path and it appeared the next step and the next step and building upon that. And that's what I've noticed as well, that when we cultivate some really wonderful and enriching habits for ourselves, like you mentioned a few, meditation, exercise, reading is an important part of my life as well, just time spent reflecting where I'm not on my phone or watching something on TV, just sitting there contemplating, often on a walk and
Mm,
without headphones, without music, and just being open and available to receive from your own mind, from your own heart, these insights that I realize have always kind of been there. But when you read something, when you listen to a podcast that inspires you, and then take time to reflect, it kind of awakens stuff already there within you, that can be really exciting. And then you take that and run with it. You might call someone or text someone or email about an opportunity, and it opens doors and it really
yeah.
builds.
Hmm. Yeah. 100%. Now, I would love to touch upon something that you said earlier as well. Is it's like when you kind of surround yourself in an environment that energizes you, and you're doing things that energize yourself. You were talking as well about getting the right downloads. I think this is crucial, like receiving inspiration. Can you tell perhaps a little bit more about how you get those downloads and how it can be beneficial for yourself to do something with it in your life?
Yes, Yosham. And what comes to mind first is, eh, really, um, the people you spend time with. And in my book, I call it your orbit, how we're all planets and we are orbit surrounding and orbit surrounded. We habituate people, places, and things each day, and that we call it our daily routine. And I started to get really mindful and curious about my people, places, and things in the last few years. My orbit, who am I reaching out to? Who am I spending my time with, and why? And I noticed that some of my habits, some of the people, places, and things I orbited weren't really making me happy, weren't really serving me. And so it was a matter of just kind of gently, letting those pass. Often you might not need to have a challenging conversation, for instance. It can often be just, okay, letting this person, place, or thing go, and then refocusing your energy and efforts on other people, places, and things, or maybe cultivating through meditation the ability to be with yourself. And that's what I spent time doing, Yosham, is like just being with me. And at night, when maybe it could be more fun, or in the past I'd be at dinner with people, what is it like to be at home and say, make myself dinner? And like that's where the download started to happen in this space that at one point might have been hard to be with myself. It started to be a place where it was very rich and full of insights, and even new people coming in. And so that's what comes to mind to answer, that the downloads are received, usually in this place of stillness, of quietness, or it could also be in an inspired conversation like we're having. I think there's no limit to that expression and that reception. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that. I also want to add, and I was just thinking about like what you said, but I just want to add on to this. Like
Yeah.
when I also started living it, like really living it out and being more with myself and really integrated about the things that I'm doing, it's not only about downloads, but it's also about what you said, like kind of attracting things that come to you, like new things, new people, new ideas. And
Yeah.
somehow you suddenly start to meet people like on the streets that have a beautiful story or that
Yes.
can help you further. So it's like, it's not only like downloads, but also like a spontaneous encounter in the streets with someone that can just happen. And you're like, how did this happen? You know, that's so
Exactly
funny. So I
that.
really want to add that as well.
Yeah, those
Um,
synchronicities, I
yeah,
hear you saying.
synchronicities. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's also super interesting. Now, something that we talked about last time, and I think that you also mentioned it in your book, is like what I find very important as well is, you know, when we are kind of living out our purpose and really want to follow our dream. You mentioned also the factor of, you know, of hope and believing in the things that you're doing, which is a kind of a success factor for accomplishing your goals, right? But that also comes with sacrifices. And you told me you made some sacrifices in your, in your life, right? When you, for example, wanted to build a second office in LA. Now, can you perhaps tell a little bit about the sacrifices that you made? Because I think it's very important for people to understand that, you know, building your dreams and living your dreams is not only about, let's say, getting into the right energy state, but it's also about making sacrifices sometimes.
And yes, and I'll start with that place where you did with hope. That hope is a precursor and things working out for us in life. Without hope, we live in despair. Hopelessness is like the opposite of believing that things are going to work out for you. And certainly I'm familiar with what it feels like to be hopeless, and I've learned that it's by, hoping is like an active belief, and this is where I am today. It's feeling very bleak today, but things are always changing. Our emotions are changing. Life is changing. Life is in constant motion. And where you are, if it's you listening and you're in a place of hopelessness, that is only a snapshot, like a photograph of this moment. It doesn't mean that tomorrow or next week are going to be that same way for you. And so to try to believe, that by taking some steps today, that it really prepaves your tomorrow and your experience emotionally that you're going to have, and then how that manifests in your life. And often the dreams that you have, in my experience, we are aware of our dream. We want a certain business, a lifestyle, a relationship, traveling, living in whatever way you can imagine. The possibilities are endless, but we might not have the obvious means in this moment to just, okay, I'm going to go buy that or do that. And so, any way that you can progressively live into that dream, again, it's like taking those steps along the path that we were talking about earlier. I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, love it there. And when I turned 43, I realized, oh my gosh, I want to live in California. I want to live in Los Angeles. And it was like this, like almost panic, like I have to get there now. And when I thought about it, I didn't want to sell my house in New Orleans and move. I wanted to live in both. And so at first I started to feel a little hopeless, because at the moment my bank account didn't show that I could do that. But I started to think, progressively, like, okay, what is the other way, universe? Like, how else can I do this? There has to be another way. There's always a way. And at that moment of just kind of wondering, and within the next month or so, I was in connection with a new person I had never met, but we were introduced through colleagues. And she said, I'm leaving Los Angeles to go travel in Germany. If you want to come stay at my apartment, use my car and check it out, and I just said, yes, what an opportunity. And so I went for a weekend. I had lined up some appointments to look at offices to see what do they look like there, what do they feel like, just trying to experience as much as I could what might it feel like to live and work there. And I met an office owner that it felt really good. And I said, hey, would you let me live here? I can't afford an apartment in LA. I found a gym down the street where I can shower. I can get furniture from IKEA that's like a convertible bed couch, to couch. And the owners were like, okay, we've never done this. This is not something we've ever considered, but we have a good feeling about you. Sure. And we tried it out. And I lived that way, Yosham, for 2 years. And it worked, until I could afford a second residence. And it's like,
Oh,
it was
wow.
actually really exciting. Like, as I look back, it didn't quite feel like a sacrifice. It felt like one of the most exciting things I have ever done to date. Like, come on, I'm going to figure this out. Like, so I had my rental car, it was like a closet with my clothing I had flown with, and, like my client files, and nobody really knew I was doing that. I mean, I finally told people, because at first I felt a little embarrassed. Like, what are you doing? This is really outside of the box. But I write in my book about often the way to manifest your dreams, it is thinking outside of the box. And it was like intense. Like, I could only see, like when you're driving at night, I think your headlights show you 200 feet ahead of you. It's like I could only see 200 feet ahead in this vision, but it was enough to just like keep walking the 200 feet I could see until I could see that next 200 feet. And that's such a metaphor that I think Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup for the Soul, talks about in one of his books. We sometimes we can just see 200 feet ahead, but that's enough. And you got to trust yourself to go there.
I love that. I really love that. I think that's
Thank you.
I think it's such an important message, not only an important message, but also like such a brave step from you to just do that,
Thank you.
and show the guts and taking the courage to really live out what matters to you. And of course that comes with some sacrifice and feeling embarrassed. Of course, yes. But if I look at myself, like for me it was also very important to live my dreams. And when I quit corporate, I also had to sacrifice some things like giving up my apartment in the Netherlands, and I moved to a new country, to Portugal. So it's like all new things and you're starting from scratch. um, but knowing where that kind of end vision is, what you were talking about,
Yes.
that is very important. And then it doesn't really matter like how you're going, like what kind of road you're going to build, as long as you keep that vision in mind and you're taking
Yeah.
small steps forward. I think that's the way to go, what you're talking about with the headlights 200 feet.
Yes. And I
So
know I
yeah.
didn't I didn't address the word sacrifice that you used, because now in hindsight, the things that I did that were challenging and maybe a little confusing, and I was reaching for clarity and the path, like, and I even think about writing my book. I talk about how, I didn't date during those few years. I didn't go to a lot of social events because I chose to write instead, like nights and weekends after my clients. And so in the moment, yeah, it felt like a sacrifice. In the moment, it felt like, but I knew if I keep looking at it as sacrifice, I'm never going to finish this book, because that's a lack mentality. When you keep looking at what you're sacrificing, what you're losing, it's never going to get you through, I think, to your end goal. I started to look at, what is the gift in this? Like, I'm learning to be a writer. I am going to have a book. This book is going to be successful. Before it was ever written, I started to really feel into what it would feel like when the manuscript's finished and when I have a publisher. And so I kind of let go of what I was giving up and focused upon what this is going to feel like when it's done. And even times like with you, Yosha, that I hope to be on interviews. And what is it going to feel like to have some new material to offer the world? And in that way, I think you can transform your sacrifice into something that feels like it really lights you up. That, like, then I became happy not to go to dinners or date, because I'm like working on something so amazing. It's going to bring like blessings into my life and others. And so I encourage you listening, if there's something you're struggling with, you might be too focused on the lack or what you're letting go of. And I encourage you to try to look at what the gain is and how this is going to really be awesome in your life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And also, like, I don't know if you have that, but if you're now looking back at all the steps that you took, you're probably going to be like damn proud of yourself for all the things that you
Yes.
did, regardless how you felt in that moment, right?
Yes, I'm
So
for real. I bet you
yeah,
too. I
yeah,
bet you as
definitely,
well in your
definitely, yeah,
journey.
yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
it was so worth it every moment.
Absolutely. So, so that's why in the end it all, makes sense. So,
Yeah.
Lisa, let's talk about your book. Such a great body of work. For me, something
Thank you.
completely new, to really understand my unconscious patterns as well. Um, can you perhaps tell, like, in a nutshell what the Chiron effect is about and what Chiron actually means for people that have absolutely no idea, like me in the first place,
Yeah.
like 2 weeks ago. Like, what does it mean?
No, I think that's a great place to start. And I can
Yeah.
very succinctly say that Chiron, Chiron, is in astronomy both a minor planet and a comet. It has both designations in astronomy, which is very unusual. And it was discovered in 1977 at an observatory in California, here in the US. It was the first heavenly body to have an odd elliptical orbit. And so the astronomer named it Chiron. Chiron was a Greek centaur in mythology who was the founding father of the healing arts, of botany, of kind of modern day therapy and medicine as we practice and know it today. And in Greek mythology, Chiron was wounded by an arrow. So he became afflicted in a way that put him in touch with human frailty. And he wanted to die. He asked Zeus to take his life, to trade immortality with, I think, Prometheus in the mythical tradition. And in this way, he became the archetype that Carl Jung talks about, the wounded healer, that it's through this wounding he had that he developed empathy for people, for others. And so that's the invitation. Chiron is also found in astrology, just like you might know your sun sign. Astrology, I envision it's a symbolic language through the stars and the planets that kind of gives us the potentials of our lives. It doesn't fix your life in any way. It doesn't mean like it's fixed, like you can't go beyond this. I see astrology as like a blueprint that you can keep what you love, and the things that you find challenging, you can grow and evolve so that they're not, or so that they transform. And Chiron is in an astrological sign. Chiron will be in Aries or Gemini or Scorpio or Pisces, just like your sun sign. And in my book, I talk about how this correlates to 12. There are 12 astrological signs. There are 12 areas of vulnerability slash core wounding. And this is where we source these patterns in our lives, Jochem, as you know, that sometime might inhibit us as far as our belief system, that we can only go as far as our largest limiting belief. And so if you know what that might be for you, you can really support yourself there to transform and change that and nurture yourself, get the coaching you need or the support, so that this isn't an area that you feel ashamed of or like you have low self-esteem. And I'll pause there to just kind of, is that making sense in answering the question?
That makes 100% sense. Yeah. Um, I'm thinking, so if you're talking about, let's say, you're talking in the beginning about orbits, about unconscious pattern that we have, about perhaps limiting beliefs. Um, Most of us who do perhaps self-development are looking at our talents and our strengths and want to kind of, and or when we want to identify more of ourselves, we look at like, who am I and how can I bring it out in the world? But I think your work is great at looking at, what areas am I actually vulnerable and how can I fix that? And I think that's a very important step. So if we're looking at that kind of transformation from understanding your wants to healing, like what are some of the steps that we can take to go from our wants to healing and really, get more enriched and
Empowerment.
empowerment. Yes.
Yeah, no, and I like what you're saying because my book, I talk about, again, I'm for the sake of brevity, I've been a licensed social worker for over 20 years, and the strengths perspective is like a paradigm I really love, and the trans theoretical model of change. So all that's in the book. The book has like lots of sound psychology, philosophy, spirituality. The diagnostic point is astrology, and then from there, it's really taking personal responsibility for your thoughts, for your beliefs, and then for your actions that we all get to choose. And so I believe that it's, knowing your area of vulnerability instead of like veering from it or kind of like, oh, I don't want to look at that, or let me compensate. Because a lot of really high peak performance achievers might compensate for their vulnerability by being, let me make more money, let me start another company, let me write another book. And while that is awesome as far as like putting out good things, it's not healing that individuals say, vulnerability in their sense of value and worth, that they believe they're only valuable for what they produce, for their performance based love. And you never get to enjoy your success. You might be so successful financially or in what you're contributing, but you never feel good enough. And we see so many CEOs kill themselves from this Chiron wounding, that like the head of Kodak camera kills himself because he doesn't feel good enough or valuable enough. And this is like epic lately, the suicide rate and people that are outwardly successful, but inwardly in poverty and lack. And so my work helps you come into alignment with your outer self and your inner self, because only in that way are we living powerfully and authentically, when we're lined up by what we're putting out and what we're believing to be true about ourselves. And Chiron reveals this area where you might judge yourself privately. You might really like hold yourself in this kind of negative light that then keeps you from shining in a happy way. You can use willpower to will things, but it's not the happiest way to create, versus authentic power, like really feeling lit up from within.
How can people find out what their Chiron is? I think this is also something that should be addressed. So how can people find out what their kind of main wound is?
Sure. So when you get my book, there's a plug-in, and I mean, you don't even have to buy my book to go there. It's at my website, nolatherapy.com/Chiron. And there's an interactive website plug-in where you enter your place of birth, your year, your date of birth, and if you have it, your time of birth, though the time is not necessary. And that website will generate your Chiron placement in Aries or Taurus or Libra. And then, in my book, you'll be able to read about what that vulnerability is. And I see, Jochem, this is like a spectrum, but for some of you listening, there might be a core wound. You might have been sexually abused, and that really affected your self-esteem and what you believe is true for you. And people like really being that victimized place, and needing to know how to transform that. And for others of you, this might be just a vulnerability. It might just be an area that like you're really hard on yourself. And so it's different for everyone. For some people it's a wound, for others it's a vulnerability. And I think that's important to note, because some of you listening might be like, I'm fine, I don't have any wounds. And that can be true, but I think we all have an area of our lives where it's like, oh, like I just might not feel so strong there, and in this way you can really uncover how to support yourself as well. In my book, who hasn't gone through a disappointment, an abandonment, a rejection, something doesn't go as you expected. So my book highlights 12 areas of life, and I give practical takeaway steps, like what you can do today to start changing this pattern. I give affirmations and just some psychological underpinnings of like, maybe why this has happened for you. So it can also be just kind of a guide to life as things are happening.
Can you perhaps share a little bit about your own, about your own one, for example, and
Sure.
what kind of affirmations you use to heal yourself,
Yeah.
and why
Yeah.
it
I
was
say
so
those.
eye-opening
Yeah.
for you as well to find out about Chiron.
Totally, Yoshim. And before I came on your show today, my meditation, it's my mantra. I am good enough, because for me, this work revealed, because I was one of those people, outwardly successful, really well liked and loved, and yet I didn't feel good enough. And I wondered, what is this disconnect within me? Because something wasn't lining up. The way I'm perceived, the things that manifest, and yet I wasn't. I was like on to the next thing. Before I wrote this book, like I created a nonprofit, I got a US patent, I'm as a therapist helping all these people that are really transforming their lives, but somehow I felt like I'm not good enough. And so that's what led me to write this book. And I think people that write books or create transformative businesses, it's usually to answer something for you, right? Like something's not lining up in your mind, and you're like, I want this answer. So you start turning over every rock to find it. And that's what I did, because I didn't want anybody to feel like I did, like not good enough and unworthy, and like like momentarily I felt awesome, but then it always came back to like, I have to like work to be loved. And it's effing exhausting, to live in that way for so many years. So for me, this Chiron and Aries made everything fall into place. That for me, it's just about I'm enough if I never do another thing. Like I am enough. I am worthy. I am loved. And it's for me to start affirming that for myself, not based on performance, not based on achievement, but just based on being alive. I am enough and I am good enough. And so are you. And so that was really my motivator to keep expanding on Chiron for every sign, for Taurus, for Gemini, for Cancer. Chiron and Cancer talks about a core wounding by abandonment, and these are people that are struggling with suicidal feelings and thoughts and even behaviors, that you feel like there's not a place for you in life. And I've had a few clients take their lives over my 20 years in practice, and it's been like, oh my gosh, if I could help someone listening not go there, my life is a success. Because everyone deserves to be here and to find their place, and sometimes it's really hard to know what that is, but it's possible to progressively really create a life, that you really want to be here for each morning.
Waking up excited, right?
Yeah, or even neutral. I don't even think you have to wake up excited. There are definitely those mornings, but even to wake up neutral. And, I start every morning with thank you, with a gratitude
Mhm.
practice in my meditation. And that builds. But I think there's also a misnomer, Yosham, that like we're supposed to wake up every day feeling, just fucking amazing. And that's just not always the case. Sometimes we wake up, if you wake up and you're neutral, if your heart is beating, this is an opportunity for you, to be who you came here to be. So I'm trying to also dispel that, like, the peak experiences. I talk about that in my book. This pleasure seeking, at least in America, is like overly blown up, that we're, pleasure seeking through social media, and like how many likes, how many hits is your, are you being shared. And it's just like this false sense of who you are in this world, that you're enough if you don't post on social media. It's really finding you again as your planet orbiting others and they orbiting you. Is it authentic? Does it feel good enough? Are you happy? Are you like, living for your children and the people in your community in a way that you're proud of? It can be as great or small, as you envision it, but it all matters. And I just want people to know it doesn't have to be these peak experiences to be valuable. And I wonder what you think about that.
I think that as long as you do something with purpose, so if you wake up with a purpose every day, if you know your why, if you know why you're doing things that you're doing, I think if you're really living out what matters to you,
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily have to wake up super excited every day, but I think that gives you a very big common ground of kind of peace in your heart, and it gives you a sense of super satisfaction when you wake up. And I think from there onwards you can build those moments of super happiness and like being very excited. So I think having a purpose in your life is very important, for for also attracting the right people in your life, for the work that you're doing, that you're carrying out, for the legacy that you're building, for the contribution that you're doing, for the life that you're touching of other people. I think that's also very important.
It
um
is, and I think what
yeah.
you're talking about, Yoshim, is kind of a more advanced, when you've mastered certain things. And my, like, I love practical wisdom. And in my book, I lay out how do you even get to what is your purpose? I mean, I have clients coming in, people come to therapy, to self help, because they're confused about that. They don't know. So I think to tell someone, wake up with purpose, what does that even mean? You have to really get to know yourself, and what, kind of going back to the beginning of our show. And like, purpose is something I believe we get to choose. And I think we spend our lifetimes defining that and redefining that. And that's what's so exciting for me, is it doesn't have to be one thing. It could be one thing for you, but it might be little things that interest you, and you explore them, and then it's like, and then you try something else. And it could be like the smallest of things. If you like repair shoes, there's like a shoe repair person in New Orleans, and she's so good. And she's had this one little store for like probably 60 years, and it's like, it might seem to some people like that's not a big service, but like you can tell this woman loves what she does. So again, I really love people to know that meaning and purpose are in the details, in like the smallest details of our life. And whatever you do for a living, it matters and it's valuable. And if you can bring some heart to that, because I think, I don't know about for you in Portugal. In the US, there's all this comparison, like, the big house, the huge social media, it's all this outward success that doesn't mean shit if you're not inwardly, really lit up by things of meaning and value that are authentic. And so I really want to speak to those of you, whatever you're doing, it might not be what you dream of, but if you start to love what you do today, that expands and it can get bigger if you want it to. So I'm wondering what you think about this, because I feel like we're talking about the same thing in two different ways. Like I want to help people access their purpose from step one,
Uh-huh.
and because that builds into like the 100th step that kind of you're talking about, waking up with this
Hmm.
vision and purpose. But for those listeners, I feel like people are drawn to my work who they don't know what that looks like. And I don't want you to go to bed. Again, suicide has affected my life in a profound way. And it's rampant here in the world, people killing themselves. And it like need not be if you just kind of make this user friendly and start where you are in life. And my book has these really tangible principles to start that.
I love what you said because purpose doesn't need to be just one thing in your life. It can be various things. And when I when I was still working in corporate, we had purpose workshops. And so what we had to do, I think it was the Simon Sinek approach, is like you had to kind of write down your purpose into one sentence. And for me, I got a headache about that because
Ah,
I had no clue how to write down my purpose into one sentence. Um,
because you're a
back,
visionary, and I bet
back
you saw so much.
exactly, I was like, I want to do this, I want to do that, I can do
Yeah.
this. Exactly. So how can I bring that all together, right? And so while I was more going on into my journey, I think having a look at your values, first of all, is something much more tangible. You can
Yes.
just write down, for me, one of my values was, for example, adventure. One of my other values was personal freedom. One of the other values was growth, community, these kind of things. And so writing down your values, and then being more aware of where you want to move into those kind of values, and also looking at what your current values or what you're currently living in. Like I
Yeah.
was living not in those values, right? I
Mm,
was in corporate, working on 100 square meters, not having freedom, not having adventure. And
yeah.
so where do you want to go to? So really living your values, I think that's could be one of the first steps if you were talking about like purpose, like making it simple, um, to live more, with meaning, and to really live out who you are. And I don't know what you think about it, but I would love to know, perhaps to round up as a final question, and also for our audience, is like, how did you find your purpose of a long time?
Well, actually, Yoshim, I came up with thinking of our audience today, kind of like three steps that came to me last night in a semi meditative state to offer. Is it
Awesome.
okay? Because I feel like that might be more valuable
Let's
than
do
how
it.
I find my purpose. Because I feel like this is something, and it's drawn from my book, but also my life experience is what I found again to like really clear up any obstacles in your way. And again, an obstacle for me is like a thought. These are thought patterns. More, whatever you're living tangibly is all the product of a thought. Thoughts are the level of cause. And so I know that when we clean up our minds and our thoughts, things start working. And so, what is it okay if I share that?
Of course, I'm already listening. Let's do
Okay,
it.
awesome. So what I invite you to do, it's a three-step process that you can use. And one of the things I've learned is unforgiveness towards ourselves. That's a major obstacle. And forgiveness is in the title of my book, self-forgiveness, because we're often taught forgiveness is for others. And that is one way of using forgiveness. The other way is for yourself. And we hold things against ourselves. Yosham, we hold, be it financial decisions, relationship decisions, all kinds of things. against ourselves. And this creates like an energetic kind of like impasse where like the light can't flow through because we just feel oftentimes shame even for some of these decisions or circumstances that happen. And so I invite you to write down a few of the things that you still hold against yourself, that you have not forgiven yourself for. And you might even believe it helps you to not forgive yourself. You're never going to forget, like, I'm never going to make this mistake again. But that is some kind of block if you just go with me for a moment. So pick up to five, like no more than five at a time, and just jot them down. You might even want to set a timer on your phone for 10 minutes to generate the things, could be relationships that you just harbor against yourself. And then the second step would be, once you have these written and you can look at them and you start remembering like everything that happened, um, to start to identify like, what did you believe was true then, because you make sense in the context of your experiences. And even if you hurt someone at the time, I know this made sense to you in a way, and it's, you didn't have the tools or didn't see another option. So start to feel into that compassion, that understanding for yourself, and start to kind of break down that the walls of judgment that you've built against yourself, and start to feel into this forgiveness. Like, embrace the lessons that this experience taught you. Like, embrace that, okay, this is never something you're going to do again, but what did it teach you? And even, were there even some gifts that came out of it, like some silver linings that unfolded later? And maybe you want to share those with others. Like, maybe you want to use this to write, to speak, to teach your kids or friends, like, to use what you've learned as like a message, instead of feeling embarrassed and ashamed, to like talk about it. That can help you feel forgiveness for yourself, to just share, this is where at the time I did this, and this is what I learned about it. And then I invite, as a third step, if your list includes other people, and it very well might, if it's possible, if you feel led to make an amends, to say, hey, I'm sorry. I've been doing an inventory of kind of looking back on things in my life, and I realize this is something I wish I would have said different or did differently with you. Take that step. And even if it's been years, it can be really healing to just be accountable and own that part of something. It's really freeing for you, and it could be for that other person. And there could be situations where that's not possible. If it's not possible because they're not here, they're not alive anymore, or you're so distant, or it would be disruptive to reach out, you can definitely, in your mind's eye, like, close your eyes and imagine that person, feel them, feel through your heart space, see them in your mind's eye, and make that amends, make that apology, and kind of listen in your heart for what they say. And it's through going through this process as often as you need to in your life, you really free up that space to then be imaginative and creative and powerful. And your purpose could be underneath there if you're feeling cut off from it. So that's what I have to offer, Yoshim, and kind of like a takeaway.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. And guys, if you want to set some time apart right now, I would like, if you're listening right now, just set some time, pause the video, pause the audio, and write down these steps for yourself. I think it's very important to get that clear and make the breakdown. So, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing that, for coming on the show, and for sharing all of your wisdom. Also in the book, it really inspired me. I'm going to encourage everyone to follow you as well on social media, your work. So please share a little bit with us. What are the best places that people can find you and your work?
Thank you, Yoshim. And I'd love to offer your audience half off a session if they're inspired to work with me through, and I do all Zoom, FaceTime, phone, it's all virtual. So half off a session individually as a couple, or a 30-day intensive. Just mention Yoshim, mention Dreambuildrs, and I'm happy to work with you in that way for you to get an experience of this. And Yoshim, I'd love for people to reach out on social media. I am at NOLA Therapy, NOLA THERAPY. And that's my website, nolatherapy.com. All Things Therapy is my podcast, and my book can be found everywhere. And I want to tell you, Yoshim, I love what you're doing with Dreambuildrs. I really caught the vision of like a Dreambuildrs on every corner. And I look forward to coming in your Dreambuildrs and like participating. So thank you for what you do.
Awesome. I would love to invite you on one of those locations, future
Yes.
locations that are going to
Yes.
be built, right? You will be definitely teaching your wisdom
I'm
and your inspiration there.
absolutely
So
yes.
100%. Lisa, what will you be doing in 10 years from now?
I hope to be doing what you said. I would love to come to Dreambuildrs and be a part of other,
Mhm.
like really collaborating with others and their vision and work and coming together to, we all have like a facet, of healing, of transformation and like just interface with others and like share, their work, your work, and have minds share, like really collaborating to help people have the resources to be their
Mhm.
full selves in life. So I see myself doing that
100%.
all over the
100%.
world.
So important, so important. I think, there's a huge demand for these kind of educational programs
Yeah,
where we need to transform, ourselves and not only our mind, body, but also the soul and the spirit. I think this is going to be happening in the next 10, 20 years. So
I do too.
I'm very much looking forward to be working together with, with you as well in the future. And yeah, I'm very looking forward to what you're going to do as well. So I'm going to follow you. And yeah, thank you once again so much for coming on and for sharing all of your inspirational insights with our listeners.